Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will be analysing the character of Fred in Charles Dickens' novella A Christmas Carol. Fred is the nephew of Ebenezer Scrooge, the miserly protagonist of the story, and although they are related, their characters, at least initially, are pretty much the complete opposite of each other. That makes Fred a foil character to Scrooge. In literature, a foil is a character whose main purpose is to highlight the personality traits of another character. Fred is an exaggeratedly good man who is generous, friendly, and forgiving, which emphasizes Scrooge's exaggeratedly awful traits of greed, selfishness, and general unkindness. So, if Fred is a foil to Scrooge, then the best way to analyze his character is to look at it in juxtaposition to his uncles. The contrast between the two men is established through a kind of thermal imagery before we even get to hear them speak. Let's take a look at their descriptions, starting with Scrooge. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Scrooge's descriptive words in this paragraph are almost all related to the cold. Words like froze, nipped, blew, frosty, low temperature, iced, and thaw. These descriptions are more than physical, of course, as they also refer to the way in which he treats people. The phrase, "he carried his own low temperature always about with him," shows that he goes out of his way to make others feel as grouchy and miserable as he is. On the other hand, Fred's description is full of words which evoke warmth, like heated, glow, ruddy, sparkled, and smoked. While Scrooge carries his own low temperature about with him, Fred heats himself by walking through the cold, both literally and metaphorically, as he does not allow Scrooge's icy comments to bring down his Christmas spirit one bit. When Fred walks into Scrooge's office, he immediately brings warmth, light, and joy, a contrast that suggests to the reader that his character will be very unlikable to Scrooge. The difference in their personalities is apparent from this imagery alone, but it is further developed through their dialogue, as they often mirror the way the other speaks, but with the opposite effect. Let's look at a few examples from their initial interaction. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle?" said Scrooge's nephew. "What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily, "what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." "Uncle!" pleaded the nephew. "Nephew!" returned the uncle sternly. "Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." And finally, "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge. Having Fred and Scrooge engage in this banter has several effects on the reader. Firstly, it shows that Fred's opinions on life are the antithesis of Scrooge's opinions. Antithesis means the direct opposite, and it is also a literary device that uses parallel grammar structure to establish opposition in ideas or characters. The two men often repeat the same words in this verbal battle of wits, which speeds up the pace of the text. The fact that Fred is not only able to keep up with Scrooge, but actually best him in this interaction, reinforces their blood relation. They may have completely different opinions on life, but because they are related, they share similarities in their intellect and the way that they speak. This is an important thing to note because it hints to the reader that there is hope for Scrooge to change and be more like Fred. In many ways, Fred resembles his mother, Fan, whom we meet on Scrooge's redemption visit to his past when she rescues him from his lonely life at boarding school. During this part of the novella, we learn that Scrooge has a whole mess of unresolved abandonment issues stemming from his cold and distant father and the deaths of his mother and sister, whom he loved dearly. This may explain why Scrooge keeps trying to shut Fred out from his life, because Fan was a great comfort to him during his childhood. So seeing her son, who has the same kindness, compassion, and joy, may be too painful for him, as he has not yet resolved his abandonment issues, and deep down he probably fears being abandoned by Fred too. If we look at Fred's life in parallel to Scrooge, there are many similarities, although Fred seems to have made the right series of choices, where Scrooge has made the wrong ones. They have both experienced the loss of a mother, but rather than shutting himself off from family, Fred repeatedly invites Scrooge to his home and never gives up hope that he will change, despite his uncle's best efforts to push him away. Just like Scrooge, Fred does not start off wealthy, but unlike his uncle, he realizes that money is not the ultimate goal in life, which means he also takes time to develop relationships with other people and find happiness in their company. Scrooge's fiancée, Belle, releases him from their engagement because he cares more about money than he does about her. But Fred cherishes his fiancée and views marriage as more than just a financial contract, something which Scrooge scoffs at. This mirroring of the two men's lives is deliberate by Dickens, the author, as it suggests to the reader that Scrooge could have been completely different and more like Fred had he made the right choices. It helps us to understand that leaving past issues unresolved can deeply affect our life's path and determine how we end up in the future. If you found this video helpful so far, please leave a like below, it really helps out the channel. One of Fred's main purposes in this novel is to represent the middle class, as Scrooge is part of the wealthier portion of society, and Bob Cratchit represents the poorer working class. Through his character, Dickens is giving us an example of how we can show kindness and generosity to people less fortunate than us, even without a lot of money. Fred is particularly attentive towards Bob Cratchit throughout the novel, saying to his friends about Scrooge, "If it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something." And in Scrooge's visit to the future, he is mentioned again. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew. "I'm heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit. If I can be of service to you in any way," he said, giving me his card, "that's where I live. Pray come to me." His treatment of Bob is an example of how employers should treat their employees, a point which Dickens makes often throughout this tale. But it is not only Bob who receives this warmth, as Fred treats everyone he meets with consistent kindness. Despite being insulted and shunned by his uncle, Fred continues to invite Scrooge over for Christmas, an action that is important because it reveals that Scrooge's isolation is by choice, as Fred still really wants him to be a part of his life. He says, "I mean to give him the same chance every year whether he likes it or not, for I pity him." When asked by his family why he puts up with Scrooge's bad temper and miserly ways, Fred says, "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always." Fred knows that Scrooge's grouchy behaviour and self-imposed solitude are only hurting himself, and so he chooses to take his insults with a pinch of salt and good humour. Again, he is setting an example to the reader by encouraging us not to give up hope on any family members who have lost their way. However, some cynics, Scrooge included, might see Fred's desperation to be a part of his life as purely financial. Because Fred seems to be Scrooge's last living relative, he probably stands to inherit Scrooge's fortune. As a young man in England at that time, inheritance was definitely the quickest way to make your fortune and become a gentleman. So Scrooge, who views the world through financial lenses, is likely suspicious that Fred is just after his money. Fred tries to dissuade him from these fears, saying at the beginning of the story, "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" In Scrooge's defense, he could be just saying that to win him over. So Dickens makes a point of clearing up this false assumption when Scrooge visits his nephew's house with the ghost of Christmas present. Fred still defends Scrooge to his friends and fiancée, even when he is not in the room, and repeatedly says that he does not expect Scrooge to pass any money on to him whatsoever. This sort of proves that he is just a good person who wants to connect with his uncle, and this scene really shows Scrooge that Fred has found true happiness through friends and family, rather than through money, which ends up making a big impact on him in the future. So in analysing Fred's character in this book, he seems to be almost without fault, almost too good to be true, leaving us to question, is Fred a two-dimensional character? He certainly seems to be an exaggeratedly good-natured, kind, and compassionate person that never gets angry or behaves poorly throughout the entire story. Dickens is known for creating these caricature-like characters in his novels that have some extreme qualities, but through them he is teaching social lessons. Fred's exaggeratedly good character balances Scrooge's exaggeratedly awful character and brings some light and joy to an otherwise gloomy world pictured in the first stave. They may have larger-than-life aspects about them, but there are certainly parts of both men that we can relate to. Dickens is trying to show us through these characters that even if we behave a little more like Fred, and a little less like Scrooge, we are already on our way to making positive changes in our life. If you'd like an in-depth analysis of Scrooge's character, take a look at my video here. Another important reason for Fred's consistent goodness throughout this novella is that he provides a sense of reassurance to the reader. Once Scrooge has undergone his transformational journey and decides to change his ways, we know that Fred is sure to welcome him in with open arms. It gives us hope for his future too, as we know that Scrooge has not managed to push away everyone in his life, and that there is at least one person in the world who sees the good in him. In fact, when Scrooge wakes up on Christmas Day, he behaves in a very similar way to Fred from then on, in the sense that he is almost exaggeratedly good. So clearly, Fred's character was written in by Dickens as a standard to which Scrooge can hold himself, and therefore so can we. Thanks for watching, guys! Stay tuned for follow-up analysis videos soon to come. See you next time!